Well, good afternoon, everyone. And it's been a busy, busy week here on Capitol Hill. I've got four topics I want to get at the top end, and then we'll be happy to take your questions. First, I've spent an enormous amount of time this week reviewing the policy or lack of policy around the administration's efforts to kind of blow up these drug boats or alleged drug boats in the Caribbean, as well as the president's increasingly hostile actions towards Venezuela. Let me take them in order. We all agree that we have to do all we can to stop the narco traffickers. But this administration's policy of let's just kill the people on the boats, sometimes not even try to sink them, versus why don't we interdict these boats, show the drugs, show the world and our country the narco traffickers, is really puzzling to me, since obviously we interdicted yesterday a oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. It shows we could do this, but the administration has chosen not to. I've been particularly focused on the first strike that took place way back on September 2nd, where, and I've seen the video, where a boat was struck, survivors were there, and 30, 45 minutes later, additional strikes were taken to kill the survivors. I believe this video, unedited, should be seen by the American public. This administration can't have it both ways, where it shows videos blowing up boats, but that in this case then not showing the aftermath. And even if the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Hegseth, who I think is not competent for the job, somehow says sources and methods, which as a former Intel chair and now vice chair, I don't accept that. You could say, well, then at least show the time of the survivors, their actions, and then the military strike. How is that any different than showing all these other videos where you show at least a clip? In the defense bill, there was a requirement that this video be released. I do think Secretary Rubio, who was in the briefing with me yesterday, having been a former senator, understands Congress's role and responsibility. But to say the least, this video is chilling. And my concern as well is, it could lead people to the conclusion that American soldiers are taking potentially illegal actions. I'm not going to reach that conclusion because it's such a damning conclusion. I want to make sure I get all the data first. I've requested from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs the execution order, the after-action report, the legal opinion that was on this strike particular, not the overarching legal opinion, or on the overarching legal opinion. It was not even printed till September 5th, 3 days after this September 2nd strike. And I got a real question. Was it altered because of the images and the actions taken by the military on September 2nd? So I expect to get those documents. I expect Hegseth to deliver at least to the Congress, if not to the public, this video, because I hear regularly from sailors' families and others who are part of these efforts to blow up these boats, is this legal? Are my kids in harm's way? And we've now, I think, north of 80 people have been killed. And other than killing folks on boats, I'm not sure what the whole policy is. Does this mean that if anybody who is a drug individual and taking fentanyl, because this is all about cocaine down in the Caribbean, taking fentanyl across the border, are they going to be shot up? Is it open season on folks who are distributing these drugs in America? Again, I'm open to taking aggressive action against narco-terrorists. I agree. But on many of these boats, we're not even sure who's on the boat. So there's huge issues around both the legality and the effectiveness of this policy in the Caribbean. The second piece of this is the question around President Maduro in Venezuela. He is a bad guy. I've said repeatedly, and I've said to you guys before, the Biden administration screwed up when the Venezuelan people voted overwhelmingly to throw Maduro out. Matter of fact, the opposition leader, Machado, I believe her name was, received the Nobel Peace Prize yesterday. But the idea that we have assembled this fleet off the coast of Venezuela and the president has not articulated, are we going to try to militarily take Maduro out? Is he going to ask Congress to declare war? What are we sharing with our friends and allies in the region? Literally, France, the Dutch, the British, who have island possessions in the region, are not sharing intelligence now because of our actions, both on the boats and now potentially with Venezuela. And you don't have to be a great student of history to know that American intervention in the Caribbean, Central America, and South America usually does not end well. And this is extraordinarily irresponsible for the president not to lay out to the American people and to Congress and to the world, for that matter, what his goal. So real questions, a lot of time on those issues. Secondly, we will be voting, the House passed yesterday, and we'll be voting at some point over the next few days on the defense authorization bill. There are a number of good things. Our military will get a 3.8% pay increase. There's additional items that I've got in on military housing, but there are two very troubling pieces of this bill. I'll still vote for it, but they're very troubling. One is, as we approach next month and the one-year anniversary of the terrible tragedy that took place at National Airport, somebody snuck into this bill the ability for the military to kind of back off on some of the restrictions we put, particularly in terms of helicopter flights around National. We know National is dangerous. Tim Kaine and I have fought for years saying don't continue to cram more flights in. But now to kind of suddenly in the dark of night try to take out or allow the military to relax their safety provisions, I think is irresponsible. Now again, the military's not taken those actions yet, and I'm going to stay on them not to relax, but why put this into this defense bill in the first place? Second issue is the question of housing. Now, the defense bill usually does get other items added to it. There were literally a litany of 20 bills that passed the Senate unanimously that would lower the cost of housing. One of my bills said, how do you redevelop strip centers? Another looked at how can we get more affordable housing in with greater density. There's questions about how we can give more support to renters. There's bills to incent communities to move the zoning and regulatory process quicker. I'm not saying there was a single item here that was going to solve the housing crisis, but if you want to talk about affordability, this had a unanimous support in the Senate that would drive down costs. And the House Republicans arbitrarily took it out. One more example of, the fact that the president, who keeps claiming the economy is A++++, I hope he goes to every contested district in America and makes that same claim, because Americans are smart enough to know costs are going up. And one of the major areas is housing. The other is health care, which will bring me to my last comment. I've just voted on the Republican plan. It candidly is a joke. It would have added $1,500 to a health savings account. $1,500 once a year doesn't even meet the increase. I had one of my a Virginian come up and testify yesterday, and we can make the videotape available. Kathleen, who lives down in Newport News, she's got a business. Her husband's got a business. She pays about $544 a month now. When you see the price increase and you get rid of subsidies, her rates go up to $1,500 a month. She doesn't know if she's going to be able to keep her business. And the idea that a one-time chunk of dollars into a health savings account, when you also would give up all of the protections that the ACA has on pre-existing conditions, on what's called the lifetime cap, it would allow the insurance companies to even be more predatory. And it's not a serious issue, or not a serious proposal from the Republicans. I'm not even sure all the Republicans are going to vote for it. I'll be voting for the Democratic position this afternoon that would extend these premiums for 3 years, give us time for reforms. If there are ways to look at, for example, making sure there's not insurance fraud. Count me in. But my Republican friends have drugged this out so long. Literally, Virginia families have to decide by December 15th what plan they're going to buy. And all the data indicates for the 24 million Americans who buy their insurance on the marketplace, about 4 or 5 million are going to go without health insurance. And what does that mean? Well, it means they're going to show up at the emergency room, which means that those of us who have health care coverage, the wait times are longer, but more importantly, the overall costs of our insurance is going to go up, because if you take this many people out of the risk pools, as they're called, and put them back in the emergency room, what's called uncompensated care, where the hospital has to eat the cost, what does that mean? Well, they simply are going to pass those costs on to folks with health insurance. It's a disaster. It is an avoidable cliff. You know, we could even do the extension for a shorter period of time and then look at reform. But this is one more example of where the president, who keeps saying everything's perfect and the economy is roaring and affordability is a hoax, I just hope folks remember, when housing costs don't go down and their health care rates go up, Donald Trump and his followers in Congress own this, because they've not been responsible at all at trying to prevent this cliff from happening. And it's not something you can punt on until next year. People's lives will be dramatically changed now. I mean, the number of folks who are going to have a dramatically different Christmas because they see their rates going up, as Kathleen and her husband, by over $1,000 a month. If there's going to be a Scrooge this year, his name is Donald J. Trump. On that, I'll be happy to take your questions.
All right, the first question is from Coulter with WTKR.
Hey, Senator, I wanted to ask you something you touched on in your comments there, specifically about the seizure yesterday of the oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. Understandably, some people might see this as a pretty significant escalation in the tension between the U.S. and Venezuela. So what is your reaction to specifically to the seizure of this oil tanker as tensions continue to increase between the U.S. and Venezuela?
Well, it is an escalation. And again, the Maduro government, they're bad guys. And again, I think I mentioned, the previous administration should have helped push him out once the Venezuelan people voted to get rid of him. But the idea that we've got a whole fleet down there, many of them home ported in Norfolk, that they keep ratcheting up the pressure when there's not been, the president should come to the American people and come to Congress and say, are we going to declare war on Venezuela? Is our goal regime change? How far are we going to go? I can tell you this, the actions the president is taking without asking Congress, which is, again, in the Constitution. The president can declare war, or Congress declares war. The president can ask Congress to do that, but is, I believe, irresponsible. And if we've now got sailors and airmen and Marines in harm's way off the coast of Venezuela, and the president's not even said what our goal is, that's not fair to those members of our military, and frankly not fair to their families, particularly as we're in the holiday season and a lot of these folks are going to be away and we don't even know what the president's goal is.
Hey, just one quick question to clarify. Do you support war against Venezuela or not support war against Venezuela?
I do not support war against Venezuela based upon the lack of facts the president has proposed. Do I increase sanctions on Venezuela and more pressure to get Maduro to leave? Yes. But to go to war without the president laying out a strong case, I do not support. And the overwhelming majority of Americans don't support. Remember, this was going to be the guy that was going to end wars. Instead, even where he claims that he's brought peace, like in Africa, where Congo and Rwanda, they're back at fighting. Thailand and Cambodia are fighting. Doing a photo op in the Oval Office and actually ending some of these conflicts are two different things. But this is, again, a president who's big on showmanship, but not very good at articulating a policy or actually building alliances.
All right, our next question is from Katie with Seville Weekly.
Hey, Senator Warner, on a bit of a different note, there's been...
Could we turn up the volume a little? I'm sorry. Could we turn up the volume a little here? I think in mine, so... All right, keep going. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No worries at all. So there's been some recent discussion of congressional redistricting in Virginia in response to Republican-led efforts in other states, which could shift us to a 10-1 or 9-2 map, potentially. What do you think about these mid-decade redistricting efforts, and do you still believe that nonpartisan redistricting is a worthwhile pursuit?
Do I think in the absence of unprecedented partisan actions by this president that nonpartisan redistricting makes sense? Yes. Do I think that Virginia, if Virginia voters approve, because this has to go to the voters, that we shouldn't unilaterally disarm? Yeah, if the legislature chooses to move forward with this, particularly after all these other states have taken these partisan efforts. Again, I'm not sure any of this would have happened unless Donald Trump, was putting pressure. I'll be anxious to see what happens in Indiana today, putting enormous pressure to try to cook the elections in 2026. So if these actions continue, I will support the redistricting efforts. But what's different about Virginia than what took place in Texas or North Carolina is Virginia voters get a say. None of this is going to happen unless Virginia voters approve.
Next question is from Mitchell with WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for joining us. I wanted to go back to the NDAA and the issue related to Reagan National Airport. At this point, obviously, it's a huge bill. This is one item tucked into it. What do you think would be the best fix or way to address this issue moving forward?
Well, Mitchell, the truth is, I'm not sure we got the votes in the Senate to bring down the whole bill and to put off the pay raises for our military. This is the one bill that does get passed every year. I know Tim Kaine and I are going to reach out to the military and try to make sure they choose not to go ahead and release or move back from these enhanced safety standards. I have vivid memories of showing up at Reagan, less than 12 hours after the crash, and to visit with the families along the way. It's just disrespectful, and whoever snuck this into the bill, it's pretty dastardly. So I'm going to probably at the end of the day rely on trying to get the military to stick to these safer standards.
Next question is from Mark with CBS 19.
Hey, Senator, thanks so much for making the time. You've been calling for Secretary Hegseth to resign for a while now. Is there anything you can actually do in the Senate to force action or increase that pressure?
Well, listen, I think it's like I thought it was a good sign that the House included a forcing of trying to get the video out and saying the Secretary can't run around the world, in his taxpayer-paid-for jet. Not going to pay for that unless he releases the video. I think we made progress. I guess yesterday or the day before, it all melds together right now. I think Secretary Rubio and frankly even Director Radcliffe, both having been former members of Congress, realize we've got a responsibility to see that video. I think the whole public should see it, but at least Congress. And at the end of the day, one of the things, my Republican colleagues who, many of them have come and said, oh, Mark, I agree with you. And boy, this guy is way beyond his competency level. But will they speak out? will they take a public stand? So far, they have not. But the frustration keeps building, and the unfortunate thing is, as we think about all the military installations we have in Virginia, the fact that we've got, again, sailors potentially in harm's way on a policy that appears to be being directed by Pete Hegseth scares the dickens out of me.
Next question is from Alexia with ABC 13.
Hold on real quick. Hey, Senator Warner, thank you so much for taking my call. So you've been focusing on delivery issues with USPS for years now. Now, do you think you've made any headway? Because we've had people who came to me who are still really frustrated.
Yeah. And we see this frustration always grow around the Christmas season as, the Postal Service gets, overwhelmed. And here's the wild thing on this issue. Trump's first Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, when he was first put in back in, first Trump administration, boy, I thought I called for his removal. I was concerned about ballots. This is around the 2020 election. The thing was, I ended up being wrong about DeJoy. The Biden-appointed Postal Commission, who oversaw him, kept him. I think he was making, slow but steady progress. He would come down. I remember he came down to Richmond and met with the whole congressional delegation. We met with him regularly. He was actually making progress that was measurable. And remember, the Postal Service, it's based upon a model where a lot of people used to send first-class mail, and they just don't anymore. And here's the wild thing. DeJoy was pretty much unceremoniously pushed out of the Postal Service earlier this year, when he was literally, I think, 12 to 18 months away from turning the enterprise around. Retention rates were going up. Even the postal unions, for the most part, thought he was doing a good job. But because I think he was not willing to, simply agree to, Trump policies without review, he got pushed out. So is my confidence level now? My confidence level has gone down, and we will, go through the. We will try to meet again. The problem is, to work at the post office 40 years ago was viewed as a great path to the middle class. Today, at least starting, you make more money in many communities at Chick-fil-A than you do working at the post office. Now, ultimately, if you stay for a while, you get some good benefits. And I think the previous Postmaster General was turning that around. I don't have that faith now. And, we will get back on this. But it is like a movie where we see, we get better for a while, and then things fall back. He was trying to, I should just stop there, but he was trying to go through a reorganization that I think made sense. And he acknowledged, especially like in Richmond, and Richmond was the first city that he tried the reorganization, and they screwed up. But what I give him credit for was he acknowledged they screwed up and put more resources, and things came back a little bit. And that kind of competency was rewarded with getting fired. So I don't have confidence right now. I'm sorry, go ahead. I went on a little long on that.
Sorry. Is there anything that can really be done?
Yeah, what we do is we can, as Congress, we can put pressure, we can bring the local leadership in, but we almost got to do a couple. We got to make a career at the post office a more viable career, and that probably means starting and raising basic pay. It also means allowing the post office to do maybe some additional services in terms of selling other items, and it means that we got to take a look at, we all use the kind of we use FedEx, we use all these other delivery services, we look at Amazon. But here's the thing that's wild. Amazon and FedEx and UPS, they deliver to all of the easy locations in urban areas. If you live in far southwest, way up in a holler in the mountains, they don't deliver that package office oftentimes. They leave it to the post office to do it, and the post office loses money on that. So DeJoy was also trying to recut the deal with some of these delivery services, and I'm just not sure where those negotiations are at this point. The thing that's so frustrating to me is, and again, I was against this guy to start. I changed my view based on his performance and the fact that he was actually making progress, and he was a firm Trump supporter, but he still got thrown out as kind of reflective of the chaotic approach this administration has taken.
Our final question is from Amy with Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner,
Amy.
thanks for taking our question. If you had a list of Senate agenda items to take to Santa for Christmas, what would you ask for?
Great question, Amy. I'd ask to say, first and foremost, let's not let 400,000 Virginians have their health care become unaffordable right at Christmas time. That would be my first ask. My second ask would be, Santa, help us think through how we don't have artificial intelligence disrupt millions of jobs, especially for young people coming out of college. Third thing I'd say is, Santa, let's sit down together, and it's just gotten too darn expensive for people to rent or buy a new home. And how can we make the notion of home ownership obtainable? And fourth, I'd say, Santa, I'm going to stop. I know I only get to certain things. I'd say, Santa, a lot of our young families can't afford childcare. So if you got two folks working, Santa, let's come up with some good ideas on how we can make childcare safer. And then I'd say, Santa, on my last one, which is kind of a nerdy one, I am in the middle of crypto market structure legislation. And it is a really hard thing to sort through. And I'd say, Santa, could you use your magic dust and make us figure out how America can still lead in innovation in this new digital asset class category, but not end up screwing consumers, and let's make sure it's fair. So, and Amy, I'd even be willing to let Santa say, okay, Mark, you've been a pretty good boy, but I'm not sure I'm going to give you all 5. I'd even let him choose his first 2 or 3 as long as people at the front end didn't get screwed on health care.
All right, everyone, that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you so much for joining
Thank you.
today's
One more
call,
time
and
next year, one more time next week before the holidays. So tune in next week for our holiday edition.